Okay, let's get it
Oh,
going.
I'm sorry, I should have done the Pledge of Allegiance first.
Yeah, let's do
Wait,
the,
flag.
let's do the pledge of allegiance first. Yeah.
Yeah.
The flag's
Let's
waving.
do the Pledge of Allegiance, and Trustee Frazier obviously has the flag. Flag of the United States of America,
And
and
to
to
the
the
republic
republic for which it stands, one nation,
nation,
God,
under God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with liberty and
liberty and
for all.
justice for all.
Thank you. Clerk Wright, would you please call the roll?
Trustee White. Trustee White, you on mute. Unmute him, please. Trustee White is here. Trustee Miller.
Here.
Trustee Martin.
Here,
Trustee Frazier.
Here,
Clerk Wright is present. Treasurer Bud.
Here.
Supervisor McNair.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Next is executive summary of the agenda. Today we have a short agenda. We have a approving of the day-to-day bills, which will be under the consent section of the agenda. We will then be considering a second reading, of a new law that allows for greater building size in commercial areas. This is to take into consideration the expanded senior development as a permissible use in the commercial areas going forward. We then will be voting on sending our new master plan out to the surrounding communities for their comments. This is a state requirement within the master plan approval process. And finally, we'll be voting to award a contract on the low bid to build out the tennis pickleball courts at Harbor Club Apartments. I need approval to adopt the revised agenda, changing business item number 1 to a second reading, not a first reading. Can I get a motion for approval of adoption?
Supervisor, I make a motion, we approve tonight's agenda and with the addition of
Second reading.
second reading on number 1. And that we approve the agenda as presented.
Thank you.
Support.
Got a motion. I got a motion for approval. I got a motion for support. Hearing no comments. Clerk, would you call the roll for approval?
Trustee Miller.
Yes.
Trustee Frazier.
Yes,
Trustee Martin.
yes,
Trustee White.
yes,
Yes for me. Treasurer Bud.
Yes.
Supervisor.
Thank
Motion
you.
passed.
Next is the adoption of the consent agenda. Trustee Paul White.
the adoption of the consent agenda, item number 1 would be the board meeting minutes of July 2nd, 2020. Number 2 would be the special board meeting minutes of July 14th, 2020. Item number 3 is a prepaid list of July 9th, 2020. Item number 4 would be the prepaid list of July 16th, 2020. And item number 5 would be the voucher list of July 21, 2020.
I need a support.
Support.
Miller. Okay, it's a consent agenda, so there's no discussion. All in favor, Clerk Wright, would you please call the roll?
Trustee Frazier.
aye,
Trustee Martin.
yes,
Trustee Miller.
Yes.
Trustee White.
Yes,
Yes for me. Treasurer Bud.
Yes.
Supervisor.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. There are no public hearings tonight. We're going down to correspondence, announcements, and presentations. I have nothing at this time. Clerk, I assume you've got something.
Really, I don't.
Election day. Election day, are we
Yes.
open?
Just election, I can announce election day is coming up August 4th. The Township Clerk office will be open the Saturday prior to election, which is, what's that, the 1st? I believe, August 1st, all day, 7:30 to 4. So anyone that need to come in that day, hopefully they got it done, but they can. But Also, we got approximately probably about 2,200 ballots in, I would say, so far. With 6,300, a little bit over 6,300 out. I don't know what's going on. They're not coming in like they normally do. For some reason, as you see, we got about 4,000 still out. Hopefully they're coming in, but at this rate, we need about 500 a day to get them back. So we'll see.
Okay, and then election day, the township offices will be closed except for the clerk's office for accepting ballots.
Yes, that's
We
true.
do that because we need all hands on deck to count ballots. Any other announcements?
Supervisor,
Yes, Paul.
Wait. I've been having an issue with my mail being very late. I've got a letter from Detroit, took 7 days to get here. Another letter from down in North Carolina, that took 31 days to get here. So maybe we should put out some type of a notice for the residents to see if they can get their ballots in as early as possible, as soon as possible, because it may take a while for them.
Yeah. Well, Trustee White that's a good idea, and we have done that already. Alicia put out on social media for everyone to get it in. I know Trustee Miller and Trustee Martin have shared it on their Facebook pages, and the Van Buren Belleville Sumpter page has shared it on theirs. So it's out there. Hopefully people get the ballots back. I don't know what's going on. I must mention that I read on the MAMC Facebook page today that other clerks are having the same issue with the small amount of ballots coming back as of now. We hope it's not the post office, but I know there are issues with the post office. And when we sent the ballots out, we kept them in the area, but when people put their mail in the mailbox and the mailman picks it up, it could go out of the area. I can't control that part of it. I can only control our ballots. So Trustee White probably has a point there. There is a problem going on with the post office. So they are taking an enormous amount of time to get the mail delivered.
Okay. Does anybody else?
Question. Do you think that when we put ballots in the mail, that they go to Detroit to be sorted and then sent back to Van Buren?
I'm pretty sure they do.
They do? Yeah.
Yes.
So when I mail it from my mailbox, it goes to Detroit. Detroit sorts it, sends it back to us,
It
correct?
sends it back. That's why we're encouraging people to drop them off in the drop box, so that way we get them right away. Pick them up the same day or the next day. So.
Okay. All right. Are there any other announcements by board members? We move on to public comment. Is there anybody, moderator, can you ask the public if anybody wants to comment today?
Hey, Supervisor and Board of Trustees, I do not see any virtual hands raised at this time.
Okay, all right. Let's see, new business then. Well, the first order is a discussion on and to consider approval of second reading. This is a final reading. Who would like to make the approval and read it? Trustee Martin, do you want to do it, or?
I can do it.
Okay, Trustee Miller.
Okay, discussion on and to consider approval of the second reading of ordinance 07-07-20(1) to add clarifications in order to distinguish commercial and residential / non-commercial land uses in the C local business district with respect to maximum building size and clarify restricts on dwellings in non-residential zoning districts.
Support.
Who said
Support by.
Okay. All right. Director Power, could you give us an update?
Your microphones, yeah, there you go.
Yep, sure. Thank you, Board. I don't have much in the way of an update since the last meeting. I will just reiterate some of the points from the last discussion and what I showed at that time. The intent of this ordinance is to acknowledge that within our commercial zoning districts, starting with the C local business district, which is our least intense commercial zoning district, there may be a benefit to discerning uses by size insofar as larger commercial uses are impacted by things like higher traffic generation and more trips to and from sites, more traffic, more parking, more noise, whereas non-commercial uses really are not impacted the same way at large scales to a significant degree. So this is an ordinance that we've been looking at over the course of 3 different planning commission meetings, which was recommended for approval by the planning commission in June, and the first reading occurred by the board on July the 7th, 2 weeks ago. I'm glad to answer any questions, but the idea here is basically to keep the size limits in place in our most localized commercial zoning district for commercial land uses, but not to keep those size limits for buildings in place for non-commercial land uses such as educational institutions, senior housing, banks, and some other uses that are non-commercial in nature. So that's a very short version of what I said a couple of weeks ago. I'm glad to answer questions at this time, however.
Thank you. All right, are there any questions, or could you give me back the screen so I can see the board?
Excuse me.
Oh, bless you.
All right, are there any questions on this issue? We've
I
talked
have
about it. No? Okay.
No.
All right, this is a second reading. After this, it becomes law. We are a law-giving body, a law-making body. So I have a motion for approval by Trustee Miller. I have a motion of support by Treasurer Budd. Hearing no further discussion, Clerk Wright, would you please call the roll?
Yes, trustee Frazier.
Yes.
Yes, for me. Trustee White,
Yes.
trustee Martin,
Yes.
trustee Miller,
Yes.
treasurer Bud,
Yes.
supervisor,
Yes.
motion passes.
Thank you very much. The next item that we're going to is a discussion and to consider approval of resolution 2020 to release the Van Buren Charter Township draft master plan to our neighboring communities. Can I get a motion for approval?
To the chair.
Supervisor.
Trustee Martin,
I move we approve resolution 2020-11 to release the Van Buren Charter Township draft 2020 master plan to neighboring jurisdictions and for a 63-day review per the requirements of the Michigan Planning Enabling Act, PA 33 of 2008.
Support.
and I heard Trustee White. I think I heard Trustee White, right?
Oh, me.
Okay.
Trustee, it
Okay. What, was it Leon?
was me.
Okay, Leon, okay. All right, Director Power, and then we're gonna be getting probably a 20-minute speech for this presentation. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, there's a lot of ground to cover. So thank you, board, for having me here to kick this off. As the new planning director, I feel privileged to be part of this process. There's a lot of work that went into this process from the board and the planning commission. I am learning a lot about the community by being part of it at this point. And I'm glad to see this process follow through near to the end. But before we get to the end, there's plenty of room for discussion, analysis, and review, and that's kind of the purpose of tonight's presentation. So the master plan for the Township of Van Buren was last updated comprehensively in the late 1980s. Our planning consultant will give a more extensive history of our planning efforts over the years. But it is now time that we look at our comprehensive community-wide master plan, which is an incredibly important document. It guides capital improvements in the community. It guides how we plan for future land use, which impacts, really should impact our rezoning decisions and how the community builds out and grows and how traffic patterns work, and how our school district gets populated. So it's very important, and we have spent a lot of time and effort over the last almost 3 years as Van Buren Township working on this plan. There have been a number of meetings with the Planning Commission and the Board of Trustees. There were 2 public input surveys, and in terms of public input, most recently the board, I believe, was involved in October of 2019 over the course of a 2-day series of workshops, and that again predated me. But at this point, we have a final draft master plan. It has the sections that are guided by the Michigan Planning Enabling Act, things like goals and objectives, an implementation plan, a future land use map, and all of these parts, again, are important to shaping the future of the community over the next 5, 10, 20 years. And so we're at the point at the process now where state law requires that the township board considers a final draft of the plan and releases it for 63-day review by our neighboring municipalities and utility and service providers. And that 63 days is also an opportunity for further feedback with respect to gaining more comments. Following this 63-day period, there will be a public hearing with the Planning Commission at which the final of the plan is considered for recommendation for adoption. And then as the legislative body, the Board of Trustees, makes the final decision on adoption after that point. So that's kind of a check on where we are in the process. In your packet, I don't know if you're able to, I know we've had power issues and probably internet issues, but there is a cover letter with a link to the full master plan document. I hope you all have had a chance to take a look at that. There's also a link to an interactive future land use map that shows you, if you click that link, you'll be able to see a community-wide view of all the different future land use categories. And then if you click on the pop-ups on the map, you will see those categories described in more detail. I won't go over those items tonight. I won't show the full plan document or the future land use map because our planning consultant has a very well laid out presentation that goes over sort of the high points of the plan. And it does cover a lot of ground, over 30 square miles in the township, and a lot of different types of land use and a lot of people that represent different vantage points and interests. So there's a lot of ground to cover. It's a big plan, and Mr. Cook will provide a presentation that boils it down and gives some history and gives the path moving forward. So without further ado, I will defer to our planning consultant, Adam Cook of McKenna.
All right. Thank you so much, Dan, for the good introduction. Good evening to Supervisor McNamara, and good evening to the trustees. It's nice to see all of you again, albeit virtually. I know that we had very positive interaction back in the fall when we were doing the community engagement public workshops for this plan, and very excited tonight to do a brief presentation overview to see how that bore fruit in this draft document. And so I will go ahead and share my screen. And what I will do is share this PowerPoint presentation. And let's hope that
that it works.
that we can get it to work. Okay. Is that working for everybody?
Yes.
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 Excellent. And so I'm going to try and, in the interest of time, really just hit on the big picture issues and sort of the meat and potatoes elements of this plan. So there are going to be some slides that we might go over a little bit more quickly than we did during the discussion a few weeks ago at Planning Commission, where we got a little bit more technical. However, feel free to ask me questions, or we can go back and review anything after we're finished. So we're going to do a walkthrough summary. As Dan mentioned, we have provided that draft document, and we're going to reference in all of these slides individual pages of that document, just in case you're following along at home. And so we'll just get right into it. As Dan had said, you have in the township a really rich history of doing quality comprehensive planning for the future. However, the township-wide master plan, as Dan mentioned, had not been updated since 1989. So in those 30 years, you've done corridor plans. So for Ecorse and Haggerty back in 2000, there's a corridor plan. Greenways and Trails Master Plan in 2004. The South Side Master Plan in 2007. Belleville Road District Plan in 2010. And then there have also been a number of standalone amendments to that master plan. So there's a great body of work that we aggregated and standardized and tried to get into one overview document to guide land use policy for the township in the years going forward. And so the rationale for the township-wide master plan, the 2020 master plan, is that this will be a coordinating document. We didn't have the scope or the time to get into the level of intricate detail that we did, for example, with the South Side Master Plan initiative or with the Belleville Road Corridor Plan. So what we're looking at doing is, thinking about this document as the first book in a potential series. So as those individual plans, this is not intended to replace those plans. This is supposed to be a coordinating document such that, as those plans get revised over the coming years, they'll then be brought into the graphic format and the same, sort of ease of use format as what you're looking at this evening. And so if there are any contradictions, and we've tried to iron out pretty much everything, so there shouldn't be contradictions, but it does state on page 2 that if there are any contradictions going forward, the guidance statements in the 2020 master plan, the draft that we have in front of us this evening, those will take precedence over the previously existing documents, but those documents will still remain in force. This is just some general review. How do we use a master plan? What is it? It's a general statement of goals and policies. It's an aid in daily decision-making. From a legal perspective, in terms of what the Michigan Planning Enabling Act requires of us, it is a policy foundation for our zoning ordinance. And so as the township makes changes, amendments to the zoning ordinance, and I know you just discussed one prior to this presentation, going forward, those should be rooted forwarded in a master plan, so that there's a legal foundation for doing it in a judicious and a consistent manner. Obviously, we want to synchronize future public improvements with private development. One of the areas that I think maybe the profession shied away from over the last 30 or 40 years, and what's coming back, is that a plan should be an educational and an inspirational tool as well to the community. We planning nerds like myself and like Dan, we love to go to libraries and look at old plans, that have been gathering dust on shelves. And when you do this, regardless of the community, you always see these images and these ideas, and you think, boy, whatever happened to them? And in many cases, that's because the plans themselves didn't catch on in terms of being able to really have an easy to understand, comprehensible message for not just the elected and appointed officials, but for all of the community's residents to really get behind a vision for where they want the community to go over the coming years. We want this to be a readable plan that people can actually pick up, read chunks of, understand easily, and inspire them as members of the community to say, hey, I'm really, excited about this vision. This is, Van Buren Township's a place that I want to live. I want to continue living, right? I want my my children to either stay or to eventually move back here and sort of pick up that torch, right? We want to communicate that vision across multiple generations of residents and officials as well, because the ideas in here, should have, well, they can get modified over the years, and you do have an obligation to revisit the master plan every few years, but those ideas should have some large scale continuity. And so on this slide, we see a fellow named Edmund Bacon, who was the planning director in the city of Philadelphia for many years in the mid-20th century. And he famously said, it's the future generations who will determine whether the creation of the present generation will be carried forward or destroyed, because these things tend to outlive all of us. Great communities develop over long periods of time. Just one interesting note: if you take nothing else home with you, if you play the 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon game, I don't know if anybody does that, but Edmund Bacon is the father of actor Kevin Bacon. So there's some connection there into our profession. I'm not going to spend very much time tonight on missing middle housing or the transect zones, but there are two concepts to create sort of a basis for communicating a larger array of potential housing types that are sort of coming into vogue, types that we've forgotten about over the last 50, 60, 70 years, but used to be integral in our communities. Really everything that sort of exists in the middle on a spectrum between the single family house, which we're very familiar with, and the large multi-story, multiplex apartment building, or the what we would call the garden courtyard apartment. Those three housing types exist right in great numbers in Van Buren Township, but we want to set the stage for there to be the potential for some other housing types to come in. So we get into the missing middle, and we also get into something called the urban to rural transect, which is another very easy to understand way for stakeholders and all users of the plan to understand what land use is like. It's not just necessarily a technical concept where we talk about a floor area ratio, or we talk about dwelling units per acre and all of these sort of nerdy terminologies. We also want to translate those things, which we use as planners administrating this on a day-to-day basis. We want to translate those things into what does that mean for a look and feel of my particular part of the community, of my particular neighborhood. And that's sort of the basis for using a transect-based approach. The next section of the plan is the regional context section. I'm not going to devote a lot of time to it. It exists on pages 20 to 28, but it's good reading in that it sets the stage for the policy implications that follow. We wanted to really go back to sort of the beginning of the township, tell a comprehensive story about why the township in 2020 looks the way that it does, why land use has developed the way that it has, what are the major form shaping elements in the township. And those are large infrastructural projects that you were graced with. It's a very unique place because, it sat at the nexus of, in the mid 20th century, large regional projects that had, international implications, right? The Arsenal of Democracy at Willow Run Airport, I mean, that existed in Van Buren Township. And the airport, of course, still exists today. The expressways that were built to serve the airport, your township was one of the first beneficiaries of getting a modern high-speed road system. And of course, today that exists as Interstate 94 and of course, Interstate 275. Following World War II, right, the development of large-scale natural amenities like the Metro Park, all of those things collectively had major impacts on where the housing, where the commercial, where the industrial areas subsequently developed. And so we want to tell that story to sort of set that stage. We'll go into existing land use. The existing land use summary of the township is found on pages 32 to 33. And what I've excerpted for you here is table 2 from the plan, which can be found on those pages. We did a comprehensive survey of existing land uses in the township. This is something that had been done for some of the smaller sub areas of the township during the various planning efforts for, say, the Belleville Road Corridor or for the Ecorse Haggerty Plan, but hadn't been done comprehensively for all 36 square miles since the late 1980s. And so we did this via both, dashboard surveys using GIS data and just sort of using satellite imagery as well. We used all 3 sources. And we think this is a fairly comprehensive and fairly accurate picture. We spent quite a bit of time between myself coordinating with our GIS department back at the McKenna offices, working with Dan, working with the Master Plan Steering Committee. And when we look at table 2, we can see where we stand as of late 2019, early 2020. So the largest land use in Van Buren Township as of right now is agriculture or rural settlement. And that's about 32% of all acreage in the township. And so agriculture is pretty self-explanatory. Rural settlement, we say that refers to areas of single-family homes that are generally on 1 acre or larger lots. Back in the 1980s, these types of lots were actually categorized as 2 separate land use categories. So the front portion of a lot where the, for example, the yard is maintained, the physical house sits, was actually considered to be one of the single-family residential categories. And the rear portion of the lot, which in many cases, especially in the southern part of the township, is unused as laying fallow in a lot of cases, that was considered agriculture. One of the things we did for this plan was we tried to say, well, from a contextual standpoint, those are individual parcel properties, regardless of how the property owner is actually using every acre of land on his or her property. That's 1 parcel. And so, you know, the house being on that larger parcel, you know, with a lot of open space in the rear potentially, that's all one lot, that's all 1 land use, and that's what we refer to as rural settlement. You'll see that the next 2 largest categories are tied. So at 14% of your total land, you have vacant or undeveloped parcels. And then another 14%, you have the low to medium single family residential, which are your traditional, you know, subdivisions. So houses with front and backyards with garages. Next, at 11%, you have the industrial uses. The airport takes up 9%. So if you have sort of a general idea of how big Willow Run Airport is, you can kind of use that as a benchmark to look at the next category, which is public rights of way and transportation. That takes up 8%. So what that means is if I could just pick up like, you know, on a Lego set or something, if I could pick up all of your roads, if I could pick up all of your power lines, all of those public rights of way, and I could lay them out end to end in a big square, they would take up collectively as almost as many acres as the Willow Run Airport does. And then we get into the smaller categories. Park, recreation, and open space at 4%. Multiple family residential. And so that's anything from sort of mobile homes all the way to garden apartments and larger apartment buildings. It's 4%. Civic and institutional, 2%. And then lastly, you know, we spend so much time out and about doing our errands, going to the bank, going to Menards or going to Meijer, something like that. And they take up a really sort of big place of importance in our headspace, in our daily lives, because these are sort of larger facilities like along the Belleville Road corridor. We use them frequently. However, they only take up collectively about 2% or about 432 acres within the context of the entire township. And then last but not least, office research, which would be things like the Grace Lake corporate area and some of the other facilities that are on the border of your industrial areas, say along Ecorse Road or, for example, on the northwest corner of the township with the new Subaru R&D facility. Facilities like that, that's 1% of the total acreage. So that gives sort of a general picture of where we are today. We can see that, you know, between the ag rural settlement, single family residential, vacant or undeveloped, that's about 60% of your total land use, the other categories comprising the rest. Okay, we get into goals and objectives after existing land use. If you haven't had a chance to read the vision statement, I know we sort of focus group tested a lot of the concepts and the ideas in the vision statement during the public workshops. But, you know, it probably helps to, you know, restate it here one more time. And I think this sums up what the steering committee, what the residents, what all the community stakeholders have collectively said throughout this process. And that's that Van Buren Charter Township will continue to be a premier community in southeastern Michigan for those who live, work, play, learn, and visit here. We will respect the unique history that has graced our township with a wealth of natural and human-made features and preserve those features for generations to come. We will cultivate a strong and diverse local economy with the resiliency to adapt to changing conditions. We will provide an exceptional quality of life for community members by adhering to standards of excellence for a vibrant and pleasing natural and built environment. And by holding to this vision, we will strengthen the civic bonds of community in our township, inspiring the generations to come to keep close watch over our special place. And so that can be found on page 38. And when we have a vision statement, we need to then have sort of implementation language. Okay, how do we get to that vision? How do we, if we're achieving it, how do we get to the next level? What are we going to do over the coming years and decades to make sure that we're living up to that vision statement? And that's why we get into stating concrete goals and objectives in a master plan. But this has to be a day-to-day document that staff, that elected officials can easily reference. And your old master plan from '89 had 9 goal areas. And under those 9 goal areas, there were 107 separate objectives. And they were all well thought out and very well written. But I don't think we can reasonably expect a member of the community or an official to really keep 107 separate objectives in front of mind, especially when making those day-to-day decisions. Having those in the back of your mind, I think, is a very helpful tool, which is why we worked to consolidate those down. We were able to almost halve them, or a little bit, actually cut them a little bit more than half. And there was a lot of consolidation and simplification, but I think the general tone and the general themes of the objectives have stayed the same. So we've reduced those to 48 objectives and 7 goal areas. And I think they're a lot more streamlined. They're simplified, absolutely informed by public input, easy to reference, and memorable. If you take a look at those sections of the plan a couple of times, you'll be able to really, using common sense, keep those in the back of your mind. And so in your day-to-day decision making, and as well as in a community member's mind, you can reference those very easily. The goal areas include the land use categories, such as residential or commercial. There's a rural character goal area. Of course, we have an area devoted to environmental, natural resources, and open space. We look at mobility, and we also look at parks, recreation, and community facilities. And that section of the plan, or that content, is found on 39 to 46 in your draft plan. So now I want to get into the future land use plan. This is kind of the meat and potatoes, as I mentioned before, of a community's master plan. And when we talk about the future land use map, that's naturally going to be somewhat theoretical, because you've got a map of the township and every parcel of land is colored in with the future land use category. So this land use scenario assumes hypothetically that every acre of the township ultimately gets developed as something, or potentially not developed. It could, for example, stay as agriculture, or it could be parks or something like that. But we're assuming that under this future land use map, every acre in the township is devoted to a land use category, meaning it doesn't remain technically vacant or undeveloped. So it's somewhat of a hypothetical scenario, because this type of build out probably doesn't get achieved in almost any community. But when we do this, we want to sort of see, relative to the scenario that we have today in 2019 and 2020, back when we looked at the existing land use, we want to see where we're going, just in terms of relative numbers, in terms of where these land use categories are going to take us. So the big takeaways would be that if all of the land on that future land use map that is dedicated to single family residential were to get developed as such, that would be 29% of the township's acreage. The agriculture rural settlement component would decrease to 17%. But again, that's still a solid 1/5 of your total acreage. Industrial would stay relatively unchanged at about 10%. One of the big changes is that mixed use categories and office categories expand to about 9%. And when we talk about mixed use, this is something we'll get into a little bit more. There's a lot of attention paid in this plan to really building out a vision for how and where mixed use development might occur in coming years in the township, rather than saying we're going to just have a large scale development which is solely single use but not residential, such as a large office park or such as a collection of commercial-only properties. We want to think about mixed use as sort of vibrant places, active places where people live and work and recreate, all within relatively sort of walking distance. And so mixed use and office categories are at 9%. Of course, the airport, we're assuming stays unchanged at 9%. And then lastly, all those other categories put together, we're at about 26%. So, you know, the takeaway from this table, which is table 3, which you can see there on the right-hand side of your screen, is that about 46% of the developable acreage in the township would be planned for either agriculture, rural settlement, or single-family residential uses. And that really isn't a great departure from the overall makeup of the land use today. But it's based on a scenario where, hypothetically, everything at some point would be built out. The overall ratio of those land uses really isn't changing very much, with the exception of moving a little bit more toward some mixed use vision for certain areas of the township. And you know, when you look at your future land use map, one of the other things we did in terms of streamlining is you can see from the left, which is the existing map, to the right, those two tables from the existing map to the draft map, we were able to, again, get rid of sort of orphaned categories that only applied to 1 or 2 parcels that had been remnants of prior planning efforts. We were able to streamline 29 categories down into 24, and we were able to streamline the definitions of those categories. So it's going to be a much more user-friendly document for everybody involved, whether you're a property owner, a resident, a potential investor, a potential developer. It's going to be a lot easier to understand the distinctions between, say, 3 commercial categories, which you can see there on the right-hand side, versus the, I think, 8 or 9 that were previously there, or that are currently there technically in your future land use map. And these are addressed on pages 51 to 64 of the draft. And so when we look at that draft future land use map, what's new? Well, what are the big picture things that have changed on that map? Well, we consolidated where single-use commercial areas exist in the township. And we've consolidated them around some of the areas where they're functioning to a high level today, right? So that would be the Belleville Road corridor. That would be the area right at the corner of Ecorse and Belleville. And that would just be a handful of other areas that were previously designated as commercial uses on the future land use map. Another large scale change is if we think about the eastern boundary of the township, south of Interstate 94, that's where you have Lower Huron Metro Park. And when I mentioned that, you know, you have these large form shaping elements in the township, the creation of the Metro Park system was huge. It was a game changer, not just for Van Buren Township, but for really the entire metro area. You know, that Huron-Clinton Metro Authority, that really is the closest thing we have to what you could call a green belt for the Detroit metro area. And Van Buren Township's a beneficiary of that, having such a wonderful facility there. What that has allowed for over the 50 or so years that's been in place really is it's created a nice natural buffer between the sort of agriculture, the rural settlement land uses that you have to the west, some of the residential, more traditional residential uses, Belleville Lake. All of those have a nice sort of natural buffer between that and what we find to the east, which is Detroit Metro Airport and some of the more industrial uses that you see going into Romulus. And I think that's really created sort of a very high quality of life for a lot of the township residents. One of the things that we noticed in doing our surveys, you know, in our studies, is that agricultural character, even though the future land use map shows that everything north of Interstate 94 along the Hannon Road corridor, so going up north to Grace Lake, was originally planned for large-scale office development around the time the Grace Lake Master Plan Amendment was approved back in the late 90s. But we haven't actually seen a lot of that development take place. You have the Wayne County Community College campus in that area, and you have a couple of other sort of satellite facilities that have located near Grace Lake. But for the most part, along Hannon Road, all the way up to Ecorse, you still have that sort of rural pastoral environment. And so one of the big changes is really to say, let's rethink that. Let's maybe reclassify a lot of those lands back to agriculture, rural settlement, which is how they currently exist. And the effect of that, the impact of that is really to extend that green belt further north of Interstate 94. And then, of course, beyond that, north of Grace Lake, you have the waste management facility, which at some point will reach capacity, and that will revert to open space. And so really what that will do over the next 30, 40, 50 years is, without creating any large scale policy shifts or any large scale changes for anybody that lives on the eastern side of the township, that's just really getting into a policy document, the fact that you're going to have a nice green belt that really protects the character of the more intensely developed areas of the township further to the west. And again, I think it's a big win for quality of life for everybody in the township. Now, we did expand some of the office research categories to make up for that. We don't want to push out any potential demand that may come in future years for those types of uses in the township. You're well positioned to have it along that I-94 corridor to sort of piggyback off of the impact of having Grace Lake and W3C and some of those other facilities there. But that is more focused on the area there along Haggerty Road, rather than just sort of doing it sort of a blanket category. And lastly, the sort of large scale changes on the future land use map are redesignating a few areas that were previously designated as, highway commercial, which is, what we did in the 1970s and 80s, which would have been, large scale single use commercial developments, oriented, but really a single use on those parcels. We've looked at them and reclassified them as mixed use areas in terms of where there's greatest potential for new development that grows your tax base. Those might look a little bit different than the old model, which was just to simply attract the next round of big box stores or shopping, indoor shopping malls, things that, as we've seen, especially in the last 6 months to a year, are really maybe going out of fashion, in the development. And so, of course, the town center area, which is centered on Belleville Road and Tyler Road, is one area that the township's been looking at for some time, and that was previously categorized as mixed use on the future land use map. That doesn't change. What has changed is the area around Interstate 94 and Rawsonville, that interchange. That's the sort of major western gateway to the township. There's a lot of redevelopment potential there in the coming years. That's where you currently have what used to be Kmart and a single-use commercial strip shopping center. Those types of properties may not be long-term the most viable or highest and best land uses, especially in an area like that where it backs up against Van Buren Park, backs up against Belleville Lake. You can park in that parking lot and have absolutely no idea that you're mere feet away from some really top-notch, beautiful natural resources. Of course, Ecorse Road. Now we're moving to the opposite corner of the township, the northeast corner. The Ecorse Road corridor along the Grace Lake property is another one that was identified during all of our outreach efforts as an area that has potential for a mixed development. And then lastly, the Sumpter Road corridor south of the city of Belleville. So sort of Sumpter Road, and as you may know, the township border with the city of Belleville does some really interesting jogs along that area, but south to Hall Road. And again, these, when we say mixed use, this is not a one size fits all category. You know, we're intending that these areas would be, these sub areas would be master planned at a great level of detail, a very specific level of detail, with a lot of stakeholder involvement in future years when the township decides that the time is right. So we're not intending that, you know, maybe a more intense mixed use type of village development that might be desirable at Belleville and Tyler Road, for example. That's not the same as what Sumpter Road might look like, which would be a lot more low scale, walkable, but more of a village type of development that's more in line with the existing context of that portion of the township. As far as what hasn't changed on our future land use map, the areas designated as single family residential, those have not changed. It's a lot of area that's currently undeveloped that's potentially planned for various categories of future single family residential. And we can get into the sort of technical sides of what all those look like in terms of lot sizes and widths, but the big takeaway is that those haven't changed. The future land use intent of the entire south side of the township, we've retained that. We didn't want to undo anything from the 2007 South Side Master Plan. Our discussions and our interviews with stakeholders and residents of the south side of the township, they told us that they were very happy with how that plan has worked for them over the last 13 years, and kind of if it ain't broke, don't fix it type of approach. So there were no major changes to the south side of the township. We have also not designated any new multiple family residential areas. If I go back to my statement on missing middle housing at the beginning of the presentation, you know, we can accommodate new housing types that are other than single family. Maybe we can do that in more of a mixed use context rather than in a, let's sort of do an isolated large scale traditional multifamily development. The township has plenty of those. So the existing areas remain on the map, but we don't add any new ones. And last but not least, we haven't added any additional acreage for industrial areas. There's plenty of space remaining, that a lot of which is currently classified as vacant or undeveloped, but considered an industrial use on the future land use map for new development that's, you know, in line with existing policies, existing zoning, can expand the tax base. And so there isn't a need to really look at any significant expansion of that. One thing that we did do was, as I mentioned, we redesignated the existing 2 waste disposal sites to be private open space, because eventually their capacity will be reached. And that's where what they will revert to. The zoning plan is something we could really get into the weeds on this. All I will say is that if you look at table 4, which you see here on the slide, table 4 correlates to a narrative section in the draft plan on pages 66 to 70. What it does is it lines up those future land use categories with zoning districts, your existing zoning districts, and then it lists a sequence of potential revisions to those districts, or in a very few cases, new districts that could be added, or districts that could be eliminated. And we discuss those in the narrative. But again, the idea, as I said, is we want to provide a sound basis in policy to have those zoning districts line up almost on a one-to-one basis with future land use categories. And I think this is one of the big achievements that we've made in this planning process. Because if you were to use all of the existing documents, you saw that photo in our first slide where they're all laid out on a table, and you tried to disentangle what the intent of your existing zoning districts are and the intent of all of these various land use categories, future land use categories that were developed over 30 years, it would be very difficult to do that. And we put a lot of work, both with the staff, the steering committee, and the stakeholders to try and disentangle those and get to this nice, very clear and easy to read table, which constitutes your zoning plan. I can quickly walk you through the mobility plan section of the document. So when we get into page 75, you can see that we have updated the circulation plan. So in that, we're talking about where would ideally, and I know that the road funding issue, and we talk about that in the narrative as well, the road funding issue is a tricky one, especially for townships in the state of Michigan, and especially with, the ongoing funding issues that we see. We don't want to, sort of put on rose-colored glasses, but at the same time, we do want to have a plan in place to say, okay, if funding becomes available, where are those improvements to our, road network? Where are they going to be? Where could they be targeted? And what's the rationale for those? And so we look at things like adding class 2 bike lanes, which by that we mean basically a widened shoulder that could accommodate safe bicycle travel on some of the paved roads in the south side of the township. We look at potential connector routes in the central part of the township. Right now we have an issue where you have a lot of land uses along Belleville Road and of course Interstate 94 interchanging right there. Those are basically uses that concentrate a lot of traffic all onto one or two roads, Belleville Road, Tyler Road. And there are very few other ways to navigate that part of the township. And so if we're going to plan for future development, maybe in a mixed use context, we also need to plan for, a more connected series of roads in the center of the township, rather than just piecemeal development by development, building things. That's kind of how we got to the point where we have the map that we have today. And so we want to look at where could there potentially be future east-west and north-south connections to distribute traffic, right? Which creates just a much more pleasant environment for everybody. It creates a safer environment and makes it easier to get around, not just on foot, but on a bicycle and other means. We also want to look at what we call critical connections, which are, sort of a low-cost strategy to accomplish the same thing. Where could there be some new connections between maybe minor residential streets and through routes in the township, again, to avoid concentrating automobile traffic all on the same few miles of road. We also want to look at the targeted paving of some roadway segments in the township as well as potential future solution to some of these issues. And again, those types of issues should be studied at a much more local scale as they go forward. But again, this is a large-scale coordinating document. Where would those projects, where would those road segments be best prioritized?
Oh, and who would pay for that paving?
Pardon me?
Who would pay for the paving?
And that's,
or would the county, or would we have to?
So I think it depends on the scope and the scale. A lot of these types of improvement can be driven by development and contributed to by development interests, depending on what kind of project you're looking at. It really depends on if it's part of a comprehensive plan. It may be something that we look at with Wayne County, but it may be something where a business or developer has to make a certain type of improvement to improve the function of the business. So there may be some contribution from the private side, but it really depends on the type of project. I know that we do a lot of planning for roadway improvements, and I know that we have support from the county in a lot of what we do there too. So some of this may be funded publicly at a broader scale, or it may be contributed to by private funding as well.
Okay. Thank you.
thank you, Dan. In the interest of time, I just want to sort of move through the last few sections here. From the circulation plan, we get to the non-motorized plan. We've updated all of your non-motorized facilities, inventoried what public transportation services exist in the township, provided recommendations on transit service, but also we want to look beyond that. Rather than just having the same discussions over and over again about how to provide mobility alternatives. We want to look at where we're going here in the early part of this century. So connected and autonomous vehicles, transportation network companies. By that, I mean things like Uber and Lyft. How can those types of technologies assist community that's a little bit more spread out and a little bit more suburban in nature, that can provide the same role as public transit, but give residents, higher quality of life and greater options rather than simply just having to drive their own personal vehicle. So we want to make sure that the plan's responsive to these changing trends, and that there's again a place in policy as new things come onto the scene, so that the township can adapt.
Excuse me, Supervisor, but where does the bus system come into this? SMART, I know, we're in the main corridor and we don't have any bus service for our residents to get to Ann Arbor or to, downriver. And I just wonder, how does that play? I mean, would that attract more? What's the plan for that? I think our residents need as many possibilities of transport as possible.
Does the master plan take into account mass transportation?
No.
No, it
No.
doesn't?
It does not.
Oh, okay. I thought that was what he was talking about there.
No,
Not mass.
and it would take a vote of the people for us to end up getting mass transportation and starting the subject. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so the purpose, one of the purposes of the plan is simply to inventory, the existing conditions of the community. And so we do inventory the public transit services that are available. So you do have a connection to AATA, for example, that does make a stop there at Rawsonville in 94. But, I don't see your point there.
Yeah.
In the interest of time, to be respectful of that, I'll very quickly go through the last several slides. If you're so inclined, you can take a look at pages starting on page 87. We have the implementation plan portion. This is really where we get to just sort of the nuts and bolts of how do we implement from a policy level all of the ideas that we've talked about up to this point. We try to make that as easy to read and self-explanatory as possible in a series of tables. And again, those are all based around the goal statements and then the objectives that you've seen previously. And then lastly, we have the background summary portion, which is updated demographics. We were able to update those to the 2018 American Community Survey, which until the 2020 census data are released, this is going to be the most accurate picture of the township's demographics that we can get. And I can go into a whole separate presentation on those, but needless to say, we've got a stable, increasingly diverse population in the township. And that's one of the big takeaways of the changes since 1989, 1990. We've got families with, long-term families and very short-term families, which is actually a very good positive sign to see that there's sort of a lot of churn in that you've got new families relocating, settling in the township alongside some longtime residents. That's something that we like to see. And what are some of the takeaways from that, right? We want to, of course, prepare for large increases in the school age population. Over the next, 10 years. We want to, of course, plan for increases in the senior citizen population. And we can go into a number of the other conclusions, but I think what I want to do at this point, since I think I've gone on probably longer than was expected to, is defer to you and see if you have any questions for me at this point.
Could you bring up the board pictures so I can see? I have my first question is 1989, was that the last time we did a master plan?
31 years?
That was the last comprehensive update of the master plan. There have been sub-area plans that contribute to the fabric of our future land use map since that time, as Adam pointed out. That is the last full update of the master plan.
Well, I know it's a big push to do it, and so congratulations, board, and congratulations, planning commission. Yeah, it's been a couple of years now we've worked on it, you know. Any other questions? Any questions? Trustee Miller.
Well, I just want to thank everyone, and we really got this done in the nick of time before the big pandemic, and we all attended many presentations and gave our input, and the planning commission was terrific in getting this through. It took so many people to make it happen, and I realized that a master plan is just a blueprint, but an important blueprint because it's about future expansion. But it's not always about certain factors, development and planning. It's got to be about how flexible the master plan is as well, because having a flexible master plan, it's a living document. It's always going to change with need because it's about positive economic development. And we have to look at any opportunities that might come on the horizon, which requires changes to the master plan. We just had that. So keep in mind, this is a living document. It can change from time to time because we want to capture those opportunities that come our way. And thank you everyone who worked so hard to get this done before the pandemic. And I know it was expensive and it took many years before it came to us. How often should we be having updates? I don't want to wait as many years as 1989. It was 30 years before we did it wholly. So how long should we be planning to have this done next time?
We should look at our entire plan and update it every 5 years, or reflect on it and accept the recommendations every 5 years. So there should be a continuing planning exercise done by the Planning Commission. But every 5 years, there should be an update or a acceptance and renewal of the plan.
Well, I hope to see that coming forward, and thank you everyone who worked so hard. This board was amazing, and the community and the commissions, they rose to the occasion and they got it done, and it's most appreciative. It's really a reflection on our community. It's about preserving the character while producing positive economic development. So thank you.
Anybody else? Treasurer Bud?
Yeah, just to say that the planning commission worked, and the special planning commission committee that worked on it worked very hard on it, and it has taken a lot of time. But when you say that we haven't done it for so long, that's true. But on the flip side, we have, I don't know why my video went on. There we go. We have worked on different parts of it, so we have done different things in the timelines that it should have been done. So it's not like we've ignored this for all these years, which I think Adam Cook did stay, and so did Dan. So it's been worked on. We did the south side. We've done different parts of the north side. We've but this is, like they said, the first time it'll be put together as one big document. And thank you, Adam, for all the help that you've done. We appreciate what McKenna has done. Dan, all the support that you gave. And once again, a shout out to the committee that worked on it. I think we enjoyed it. I think a lot of us learned a lot, and thank the board for supporting it financially.
Treasurer Bud's been on the planning commission now for 25 years. So that's why I asked if she had anything to say about this. This document's going to go out to our neighboring communities for comment. Just so everybody knows, Belleville's, of course, is in the center of Van Buren. We have a special relationship with them. We did have a joint planning commission meeting with Belleville. I believe we did with Sumpter also at that time. We've really reached out to the communities around us to try and get as much input to do a good job on this. So, is there anybody else who want to make a comment before I call for a vote?
Supervisor.
I have a motion. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I want everybody to understand that this is just a plan. And if we get a special project or something that can fit into this plan, then we can rezone an area to fit the project. We've always done it in the past. We'll be there in the future. This is just a plan for us.
Yes, living document.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's flexible.
Okay, hearing no further discussion, I have a motion by trustee Martin and supported by clerk Wright. Could you please call the roll, clerk Wright?
Yes, trustee White,
Yes.
trustee Miller,
Yes.
trustee Frazier,
Yes.
trustee Martin,
Yes.
Treasurer Bud,
Yes.
yes for me. Supervisor,
Yes.
that's it.
Okay.
I think I
Motion
got
passes.
everybody, right? Did I get everybody?
Yeah.
Okay, motion passed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cook. You guys have done a wonderful job.
Yes. Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks to all of you. And it's been quite a pleasure working with all of you on this.
We're now moving to line item number 3, which is discussion and consideration of an approval of the selection of Davenport Brothers Construction for an outdoor pickleball
Supervisor,
project. Who said that?
Supervisor.
Trustee Martin? What?
Uh,
Who would like to make a motion for approval?
says, I will. Supervisor,
Clerk Wright?
like to make the motion on the discussion and to consider approval of the selection of Davenport Brothers Construction for the outdoor tennis and pickleball renovation project.
Support by Terry Bud.
Bud? Okay. Elizabeth Rowe, please take it away. You did
Good
a great job.
evening. Good evening, board. So we're here tonight to recommend the approval of the selection of Davenport Brothers Construction for the outdoor pickleball and tennis court project in the bid price of $204,475. And Mark Davenport from Davenport Brothers Construction is here tonight as well. So I'd like to share my screen. All right, can everyone see that?
yes.
So on June 2nd, 2020, the Van Buren Township Board of Trustees approved the 10-year ground lease with Habitat Company in order to lease the parcel on the northeast corner of Denton and Beckley Road, which is also the Harbor Club tennis courts. So the agreement that was approved designates that the township will restore the existing courts, the parking lot, and operate recreation programs on the parcel. So once it's renovated, Van Buren Parks and Recreation Department, along with the senior department, would partner to program the use at the outdoor courts as part of the park system that we already have. Outdoor tennis and pickleball leagues could be developed, as well as have drop-in play. Harbor Club residents would be able to have a time specifically scheduled for a league if they requested it as well. So we did the bid opening on July 7th of 2020. The township received 5 bids from various contractors. The main scope of the renovation includes the demolition of the current tennis court surface and fence. As you can see in the photo, that's the current view off of Denton Road. Also, the scope includes installing new tennis and pickleball nets and color surface system with striping, grading the parking lot and laying asphalt in the parking lot, installing site furniture such as benches and trash cans, and also installing a divider fence between the rows of pickleball courts for ease of play. So the base bid that we bid out included 2 different court designs. So let me just scroll down. So design 1 was 1 tennis court, this green area, and then 3 pickleball courts. So we did this sort of as more of a cost-effective option. And then design 2 included 2 tennis courts right here, and then 4 pickleball courts separated by a divider fence. So the Department of Public Services would like to recommend that the Township Board approve the agreement with Davenport Brothers Construction for the bid for a total of $204,475. This would be based on choosing design 2, which is the one pictured, which would be 2 tennis courts and 4 pickleball courts. We would accept the alternate of a standard acrylic 3-coat system instead of the cushioned surface. And we would also accept the alternate of installing a new fence due to the state of disrepair of the current fence. So if approved by the Township Board, the contract would be awarded to Davenport Brothers Construction. The project would begin. And it seems like it would be anticipated to be completed in September of 2020. Is there any
Quick.
questions?
So so as we talked about at the lease, we were thinking 4 pickleball courts. Well, we discovered, we got with the Pickleball Association of America, Elizabeth Renaud did, and discovered the exact sizing of these things. It became evident that putting a pickleball court on a tennis court is actually bad for a senior because they're going to be running for that ball a lot, especially whenever they miss it, they're going to have to go get it. It's actually a lot of work. You're better off making it the way we did it. It also preserves 2 tennis courts, which I have had emails requesting that we leave a tennis court or 2 there. I also have a letter from a person that I'm not going to read because they're very upset about the condition of that golf course and tennis court have been pretty much destroyed, and wants us to basically get in there and start doing something with that golf course. And if they don't fix the tennis court up, basically rip it out. It used to be a jewel. Well, we are doing something with the tennis court if we do this today. It also, since we're losing the golf course, when we are losing the golf course, they let it go too long. They can't save that thing cost effectively. This may shore up the area a little bit. There are plans that the Director Best may want to talk about in a minute, but let's stay on the tennis court. We also would have the Iron Bell Trail going in front of it. I think that this will do a lot to boosting the area look-wise, and that's what we're all about. We're about creating wealth. Creating wealth means causing people to be happy where they live so that they'll pay more for their houses. Houses prices go up. It's taxes go up, so and we can afford to stay in business. So it's about making sure that we do something that the people want and will add value to the community. And I believe that this will add value to the community. Any questions?
Supervisor.
Go White and then Fraser, since he asked first.
Supervisor, I have a bit of angst about this. First of all, a 10-year ground lease. In 10 years, any advance or improvements we make will go back to Harbor Club. And I would like to see that extended to 50 years. And if they don't want it to go 50 years, then the heck with them.
There is a 10-year lease with 2-year lease.
Harbor
Technically, it's 14.
would be able to have a pardon? Harbor Club residents would be able to have a specifically scheduled time for a league if requested. And we're going to have a 10-year lease on that if this is passed. And they could specify times just for the Harbor Club residents. I don't agree with that, spending our money for private people. That's very inappropriate. What if they decide they want to use 5 to 8 every evening? That would be the most popular time. Also, the prime time. This pickleball court and tennis court is going to be outside, and it's only be available probably more than likely 5 months, maybe 6 months a year, and that'll only be summer use for that. And I understand summer use. This is going to cost us $21,000 a year just in the following selection on the bid, just to improve it for 5 or 6 months use, plus the upkeep, and it's not going to be available, as I understand it, for September of 21. And there's just too many negligible things in this project background and the memo that would be a disadvantage to our residents. And it would be a tremendous advantage for Harbor Club. Harbor Club could use that anytime they wanted to, a specifically scheduled time just for their own league. I can agree to this, and I agree with the design, how it's going to be, divider fence, but the rest of it is, as far as Harbor Club having a league there, that could take up every evening or 4 evenings or all day Saturday or something else. $205,000.
Okay, you're going around in circles. Can I ask?
No, I'm not going around in circles. I'm just wondering.
Yeah, you're saying the same thing
on everything that I'm expressing. And
I know, but you've asked the question 3 times now. Director Renaud, how often can they schedule leagues?
So it wasn't specifically established in the lease, but it was more so of a you know, we would work with Harbor Club, Parks and Rec would
Sure.
work with Harbor Club, and it would be an
Yeah.
amicable agreement.
I'll work with Greenbrier. I'll work with Andover. I'll work with anybody that wants to put up a group of people to use that court. I mean, it's a wonderful thing to have people use what we build. So, okay, noted, Trustee White. Trustee Frazier.
It's township money for a private use.
Okay,
Through the chair.
Trustee Frazier.
I pass right now.
Who's next?
To the chair.
Trustee Martin.
As I recall, I think Harbor Club is in Van Buren Township and they're Van Buren Township residents.
Yeah.
It's not like they're from outsiders or from another community. They reside in Van Buren Township.
Trustee, thank you. Trustee Miller.
I keep hitting the button that says raise hand. Should I not be doing that?
It doesn't come up on mine. I don't get a hand
Yeah.
or anything.
Okay, good to know. I won't do that. Expect a turn. I'll just jump right in.
Just throw your hand up.
My question is, why only 10 years? I thought we were going to look into extending that longer. 10 years, this whole project's over 200,000, is it not?
Yes.
Yeah, yes, it is. So we
200,000 for 10 years doesn't seem
wanted 15 years.
right.
Okay. The reason we wanted 15 years is because the lifespan of this tennis court's going to be about 15 years. They approved 10 with two-year renewal options because they don't know what they're going to do. Now, remember, this company that just bought this thing, we tried to do this 3 years ago, but the old company was selling Harbor Club. These guys just bought this a year ago. So they're not really sure what's going to happen in the future in this area. Now,
So the transfers, if they sell, Supervisor, what if the corporation sells? What happens to the agreement?
it follows, it stays with the corporation.
It stays with whoever owns the property.
Sure, that's a federal kind of law. Yeah,
All right, thank you.
they bought it.
So going back to the 15 years, can we not do 15 years?
They wouldn't do, they'd only do, they wanted to do 10, 2, and I said, add another 2, and I'll take it to the board and see what they say, and you guys said yes. But that's how they wanted to go. I also went to them and asked if we could buy it. We offered 30, they wanted 100. We said no. So.
All right.
All right.
Supervisor, so you're saying we offered 30 for the property? And
We went up to 30, yeah, in the negotiations, we went up to 30, but there was, we were at least $70,000 short of what they wanted, and we weren't going there.
Or something that we're taking care of and we're maintaining.
Well, there's not much maintenance to it because the most maintenance is the lawn around it, and that's Harbor Club. They're going to maintain that.
Oh, they are? Okay.
Yes, Clerk Wright.
Okay, just a reminder, the motion maker normally is the first one to get a chance to speak, but I'll let you pass this time. Okay,
You're right.
okay, so I agree with Trustee Martin. They are part of the subdivision. I mean, part of the community, that subdivision. Paul, I also agree with you, Trustee White. As long as it's not monopolized by one area, I think it's got to be make sure that anyone that wants to use that facility has the opportunity to use it. And I agree with it. I mean, I know we talked about it in the beginning. So that's the key. It would be nice. I know you say you got a letter. It would be nice if we could have done something to that 9-hole golf course. We did lose the major one, and now we're losing the 9-hole. So I'm an avid golfer, but I get a lot of complaints from the golfers that said we have nowhere to. We've lost both of our amenities in the township, which we have for those that do golf. I wish we could have did something with it.
We tried. We tried.
Supervisor, one thing.
What's that, Clerk Wright? Are you done?
Yeah, you said you tried. Who did you?
Yeah, so basically they came to us and said, you want to run the place? And it was kind of, we calculated out that it was going to cost us about $250,000 to open it 3 years ago. And we said it's going to cost, and the league play had already stopped. So there was going to be no league play. So it'll be a flat $250,000 loss just to get the place up, running, and mowed for the season. Then hopefully you can break even on your operational costs. So we came back and said, listen, we'd consider this if we get a 5-year deal, because we got to recoup $250,000 of costs. And they said, no, we would never do that. I said, well, how many year deal would you do? They said, we're only going to do a year-to-year deal. That's all. And we said, we're not doing a year-to-year deal. Not a chance. And
Supervisor,
nobody would. Everybody that went to walked away when they heard year-to-year. Go ahead.
through the chair.
Yes, Trustee Miller.
How do we ensure this whole thing stemmed from getting our seniors a place to play pickleball? How do we ensure that this is going to happen and they're not squeezed out? Right now, we can do something about it. We don't want to have our seniors squeezed out by leagues.
I will be the happiest person in the world if you have to schedule time on this court. That would be the greatest thing in the world. But I can tell you, the condominiums across the street from the tennis court, their HOA, I've heard from people in their HOA, they're excited about it. I have a letter, this one I read to you. This is a homeowner who lives right next door to that tennis court. He's happy that it's happening. He sent me an email after he sent me this angry letter saying that, he's glad to hear that the tennis courts were trying to do something. The people that are going to use it, that we know that are going to use this pickleball court, are the seniors. And we went to one of those, we went to that video presentation, and you saw there was like 20 seniors in there that are pickleball crazy. They're from all around the township. So
Through the chair.
yeah.
Well, we don't want to have any complaints from them once this is up and running. It's going to be pretty
No.
quick that they can't use it, because we will hear from them and they'll be loud.
We have not had a problem like that in anything that we own. There's always room. So,
All right, great. Thank you.
did I have Treasurer Butt or?
It was me, I think.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Rowe.
Yeah, I just think it's important to remind ourselves that it will be operated and facilitated through the Van Buren Township Parks and Recreation Department. It will be considered essentially one of our parks through the lease. So we will maintain control over it.
Excellent.
Through the chair, that's what I was going to comment on that too. When you read that, it definitely states that all the programs go through the recreation department, and at some point in time, if that becomes a problem, the recreation department will step up and I'm sure go through the supervisor, and those issues will be taken care of to the benefit, I'm sure, of the residents and the seniors who it was intended for.
Through the
Okay.
supervisor.
Trustee Frazier.
Yeah. Well, I just want to make sure that there's a demand and a need for these pickleball courts. $200,000, isn't jump change. I mean, I know that it's popular some, but do we have a league right now? Or are we thinking about starting leagues after we get the pickleball court? Is that
The
what
league, okay, right now, the people that do play pickleball are not allowed to play here because they played in the gymnasium. And there was a lot of them. And they were here 3 days a week.
Nobody's
What?
playing out there now, is what you're saying.
No, we won't let them. We won't let them.
Through the chair.
Finishes. Yeah.
Yes, Director Best.
To specifically talk about demand, Director or Elizabeth Renault and I went yesterday? We went yesterday to Canton Township's pickleball courts. They have a very similar setup. They have a 6 pickleball court without any tennis courts. It's just specifically for pickleball. And it was the middle of the day. And actually, yeah, right here. This is the activity going on a Monday afternoon.
Wow.
those aren't seniors.
No.
Those are people who are school age, high school, college, enjoying the pickleball courts during the day.
Mhm.
Now that's because they're off, it's summer, right?
Yeah.
However, when I went on Saturday, there was a wrestling banquet at the same park. I went on Saturday and there were, every single court was occupied. There was waiting and there was a group of seniors just cleaning house on those young kids and having a ball, having a ball. This is the principle that I think Elizabeth Renault and I are pushing for when we build these recreation, when we propose these recreation facilities and look at how they're being designed. If you build the program and you create the physical place for people to use, they will use it. Canton Township in that park, at Freedom Park, which is located at Palmer and Sheldon Road, they've installed over the last few years, very recently, 6 pickleball courts, 2 state-of-the-art sand volleyball courts, a basketball court, a disc golf. It's only on 20 acres. And just like Quirk Park is, there's never a time where I've seen that park devoid of people. There's always somebody using it. This is an opportunity where we can put that principle into place, build it and program it, and they will come.
Build it and they will come.
Our Parks and Rec department is, they are the best. I hands down, I think they are great at programming. I've heard Supervisor McNamara say that many, many times. If we offer seniors time during the day, when that's when they love to play is during the day, and we offer other leagues at night and senior leagues at night on different days, and the Parks and Rec is putting it together, I think our Department of Public Services believes this is going to be a successful place to do this.
One more comment, Supervisor.
Right.
Yeah, I totally agree with Director Bass. I think, I've been saying that for a long time. You build it and they will come. And in order to get to that premier community that we keep stressing we want to be, we have to continue to do these kind of things. I think Van Buren Park would be a great area for something also like this. I do believe this will be utilized a lot, but I think that area would also be utilized a lot if we could put something like tennis courts and the same out there, along with some basketball courts that I've been asking for also. I think if you do that, you attract people there, they will come, and then you will get more visitors to that park and more awareness to that park. But you got to put something there to increase the awareness. If you don't put it there, everybody drive by there and see a sign and keep driving.
Yes.
So
All right.
I agree, Director Bass, you're absolutely right. We build it, they will come. That's been proven.
So there is room for expansion of other activities there, right?
No, well, no, we'd have to do another deal with the Harbor
No.
Club. Although they are looking at doing some things on their own because they've got a large golf course they got to figure out what to do with, and it sounds like they're going to try and make some park-like atmosphere out of that course. So that'll be nice. I do have to add one last thing on this. It was submitted to the board without an area to take the money out of. There was a couple places I was thinking of, but during the last week or so, we have been tracking our expenses and we've been doing budgets and going through the budget process department by department. It appears that we are going to run a surplus in our general fund. Probably a considerable one because our revenues are holding up and our expenses are far less than they were. So rather than take it out of another area, we don't need that much money in our general fund surplus. General fund. What do they call it? That pot of money, the general fund.
Fund balance. The
Fund
general,
balance. Thank you.
where it'll come out.
I would recommend taking it out of fund balance because at the end of the year, you're going to drop a whole bunch of money back into fund balance. A whole bunch, I think. So,
Supervisor,
yes.
so would it come out of fund balance and go into Parks and Rec?
It
Yes.
would come out of fund, yeah, yes.
All right.
And then at the end of the year, if you ended up with, you take, if you had a balanced budget, then you'd have $200,000 less in your fund balance, but you're not going to have a balanced budget. You're going to have a surplus.
Supervisor.
There's no overtime going on. There's no projects going on.
Supervisor.
Yeah.
I would be 100% in favor of this is if this were being built behind Township Hall.
I actually love the idea that we're building it in the subdivision. We're building it. We really don't have anything there. I don't care what people say about Van Buren Township Park. Van Buren Township Park is inaccessible to this part of the community. They lost their golf course. I really love the idea of building something in this area. And the condominiums across the way, the Bay Harbor, I think they're called, those wonderful little condos that I wanted to live in. They love the idea. The homes that are along love the idea. I think it really adds something, I think, to the community.
With the chair.
Yes, sir.
And like Paul White, Trustee White expressed that he wanted to build behind Township Hall. And this is the very reason why we need to continue with our plans to look at building a community center. Right now, the gymnasium and the building that we use, the Township Hall, is being strained. So this is a perfect example of why we need the community center. And we could have outdoor courts as part of that. So I think what we're doing now is just like we expanded the Township Hall for the dance and the other programs there, this is an extension of that until we can get this center built. So I think it's a good idea for now.
Property across the road. Property across the road.
But
right.
this is something that can happen right now, right?
Oh, yeah, right now. You've already approved the lease. The lease is done. So now it's just a matter of building out the project.
On existing property.
Yeah.
All right.
In an area where we really don't have anything, they just lost a golf course. At any rate, is there any other discussion?
No.
Okay. Hearing none, we have a motion by Clerk Wright, supported by Treasurer Bud. Hearing no further discussion, Clerk Wright, would you please call the roll?
Yeah, yes for me, Treasurer Bud,
Yes.
Trustee White,
No.
Trustee Frazier. Trustee Frazier,
Yes, yes.
Trustee Martin,
Yes.
Trustee Miller,
Yes.
Supervisor,
Yes.
motion passes.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Jordan.
And I guess, yeah, that's it for that. We are working with the Harbor Club Apartments to try and do something. Matt, are you allowed to talk about that?
I can talk about the basics. So as you know, the Iron Bell Trail is currently being worked on, and even though some of the funding has been held up by the state during COVID-19, a lot of the funding is still continuing. In fact, Wayne County is still moving forward with the paving of the infamous saddle area, the place in Van Buren Park where it goes down and makes a dip and comes back up. In inclement weather and in the winter, it's dangerous to travel on that dirt road. We had a grant from the county, if you remember, for $500,000, which is more than enough to pave that section. The trail project is going to go right through Van Buren Park. As it goes through Van Buren Park, it will go to the old Denton connector bridge that leaves Van Buren Park that was removed years ago, and we will be creating a second access point to that park. As the Iron Bell Trail moves through, it will go right through that area and go in front of Harbor Club Apartments on the north side. I will very quickly here just show you what I mean by that. When the trail comes through the park and goes in front of Harbor Club Apartments, the interesting thing is It will go right by this golf course, and as Supervisor McNamara stated, it will go right by the where the tennis courts are located. I'm ready to share this now. And so, as you can see, the project location is noted here on the map with this push pin. This is where the tennis courts are. But this whole green area here and the green area followed around this area is all the golf course. Harbor Club Apartments of their own volition is working to find an alternative use for that property, since the golf course is not economically feasible for them at this time to restore, but they still want to give an amenity. Our trail goes through Van Buren Park, through here, over the bridge, and in front of Harbor Club. In fact, it goes right past what the old golf course road right here, Harbor Club Golf Course Road. We have put our consultant in charge of the Iron Bell Trail, Jeff Smith from PEA, in touch with the landscape architect who is working on the potential nature park that would be put in. And believe it or not, you know who this landscape architect, we've worked very closely with him here at the township, Russell Design. Mark Russell, who did our landscape plan, who's done work for us at French Landing Park, who is the person who was behind the design for the Quirk Park improvements that we all know and love back behind Township Hall. So their plan is in good hands. And in talking with Habitat, they want to create an amenity for their residents. And because our trail goes right through there, we can connect to this amenity, and it becomes a township benefit as well. So by
What's
this,
the
There's only one there.
a nature park with a trail system and interactive interpretive signage. It'll be a hiking trail through the golf. And so by this partnership that we are in the beginning stages of in these projects with Habitat Company, who after buying the apartments is putting millions and millions of dollars of improvements into them over the next 5 years to improve them. So this is part of their commitment to improving their property for their residents and for the township. This small connection to the Iron Bell Trail, which won't cost us anything, but our cooperation with them to create that connection in the future will make the golf course an amenity over time. Now, it's still in the planning stages and they're still working out the bugs. But if this does happen, like I believe it will, this could become a focal point for passive recreation, very similar to what happens at Riggs Heritage Park.
I see. So the township residents will be able to use this.
We're working on that right now. I don't think there's going to be a problem with them walking the trails. That's something we'll have to work through as we go.
Could you take it down so I can see the board again?
Yes, sir. Sorry.
No, that's great. The point, I guess, is that we recognize that we've lost an amenity here. And we realize that it's overgrown. We realize that something's got to happen there. That area was just such a pretty little area that it's not so pretty anymore. We've got to try and bring it back. And that's about it. All right, I'm going to be moving on now to the reports. And of course, you have our budgetary reports of January, February, March, and April there. We're into the public comment for non-agenda items. Is there any public out there that wishes to comment on anything? We'll wait for the moderator to check.
I do not see any virtual hands raised at this time.
Okay. And and then we'll ask for the board comments. I'm going to start off with my son is supposedly watching this on YouTube. And I'm in my den where you hang all your little pictures from around the place. And I see this one sitting right in front of me. So I'm going to say, hi, son, this is his first push-up.
Oh, you're embarrassed.
So that's it for me. Anybody else have anything?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Trustee-
Supervisor. So as you know, we're all experiencing these power outages and they're constant. If it's not a storm, it's no reason at all. You just lose power. I'm getting complaints. I'm sure all of you are. We've got to do something about this going forward. This is getting out of hand. And I know I've received several letters over the last few years saying that they're working on the infrastructure and nothing happens. And if it is, we don't see it, but we're all still experiencing these outages, and we need to, as a township board, we need to do something about it, whatever we can.
Okay, so you're right. You're getting those things because we're complaining so much. And they're sick and tired of hearing us complain. In fact, I talked to them for 20 minutes on the phone today, and they tried to explain to me a problem they had with the Willow Run connector conduit and the French Landing conduit. And I said, what is that? And they said, well, think of it as, it's not a tree on a wire problem you got a major wire problem. So, and they said, well, we promise we're going to get to the president. You do see new electrical poles going in the south all over the place. Those poles are not permanent. They're putting those poles up right now because they're trying to fix the old problems, and then they're going to move the wires back over. They are doing stuff, but obviously they're not doing enough, and I don't know what I can do. It's DTE.
Supervisor, I think they need to communicate more with the public and let them know that this is not a simple fix. It's going to take time, a lot of money, and a lot of effort on everybody's part to get these kind of things taken care of. You know,
DTE,
communication is key.
DTE will not allow any of their engineers or people to attend our board meetings. Just to let you know that. We've asked.
Well,
Getting through to them is impossible.
Well, they need to make some kind of statements online or something more than they're doing.
Clerk,
That's my suggestion.
Clerk Wright?
Yeah, I have one of the managers at DTE that sits on the HOA board. And I was on the phone with him extensively during this outage. He told me that DTE has put millions of dollars into enhancements in this area, but some things they just can't control, like what happened Sunday. He suggested, which what he's getting ready to do, is purchase a generator, because some things they just can't control. So this dude is high up in the chain, and if he's telling me that kind of stuff, I don't expect anything major to happen no matter who they contact. So utility companies, this is what they do. They give you promises, they charge you a bill. So we're going to continue to have outages. We're going to continue to have outages, and they may be able to get something done on the south side to correct some of those issues, but don't expect nothing drastic.
We haven't had it all these years, so.
Supervisor.
Trustee Bud. Bud, your mute is on.
I don't want to defend Detroit Edison, but I do think in answer to that this time they have answered and responded more, because I got 4 telephone calls. So I think they have tried that. I think eventually they ought to be burying all these wires so we don't have to worry about the tree damages and that kind of stuff. But I do believe they did make an effort to communicate with everybody.
Let me ask you a question. Do we have an ordinance that requires them to bury their electrical lines?
Not that I'm aware of.
Can we make one? Can we put one in place?
Yeah, probably can.
I doubt it. They're the utility company.
Yeah, I saw it happen in Livonia in 1968. That's how far back I go.
Wow.
And
Your residents are getting very upset.
And Michigan Bell and the electrical company got together and hired a passel of lawyers, and it came down to a 4-3 vote. But they swore that they would sue Livonia to death if Livonia passed that ordinance. I've never heard of it being forced on anybody, but I don't know.
Supervisor,
Trustee White?
I think Detroit Edison Company is doing a fantastic job. There is no way that DTE will ever be able to control the environment. People plant huge trees close to the power lines. Those trees grow up. And we had a very tough storm to come through here. And I think that all the stations, weather stations in the city reported that the eye of that storm passed over Van Buren Township and the city of Belleville. We have to prepare for these. And I know that I have relatives that live up north, and they are consistently losing their power because of trees falling on power lines and things like that. And we're very lucky because our Edison poles are very high up, and it takes a huge tree to fall on that line. And I saw a platoon of Edison trucks, maybe 20 of them, pass down Haggerty Road in front of my house going south. And Edison does everything they can to make sure that our senior citizens who have sicknesses that require power are very well taken care of the majority of the time. And we can't control the weather. We shouldn't even try to. And we have to understand that these things are going to happen. We must be prepared for it.
Supervisor, but yet we still have no power at the
refrigerator
township.
closed. I'm sorry, Reggie. And that's what we have to consider. Do everything that we can. Make sure if we have a tree growing close to the power line that we have it trimmed. If we don't, and it gets on the line, Edison's going to come and drop that tree, and it's going to be in your yard, and you're still going to have to pay for it. So I compliment Edison. I've lived in several areas, and the infrastructure was nowhere near how it is in Van Buren Township as far as gas, Edison, water, and everything else. We have the life of Raleigh on a lot of occasions. We can't control the atmosphere or any type of natural events that come through our township, and we shouldn't even try to. We should make sure that we are aware of these happenings and that we are prepared when they do happen. And I dare say that there's probably 4 or 5 people on this board right now that have generators.
I think they're doing a crap job. They're pissing. I'm really angry with DT. I think they're terrible right now. I think they've really let down Van Buren Township, and I'm really not happy with them. And I have a question. Reggie, you can go right after this. Dan, did you pop on here because you've got something to say, Dan Power?
Yes, yes, if I could, I just wanted to mention that our zoning ordinance does have references to burying utility lines in certain types of projects. We probably don't have a lot of local control over major transmission lines or major poles, but for new PRD projects, new site condominiums, we do have the authority to make sure they bury their.
Okay, get with me tomorrow. Let's take a look at, maybe we can use that as a carrot to talk DT to put some more money into our infrastructure, or tell them everything's got to be underground from here.
I'll scour the ordinance, see if there's any other reference to burying. I think it's.
I'm sorry.
Resident.
Thank you, Trustee Miller. I'm sorry.
So it isn't about just the storm, Trustee White. It's about all the outages over a period of time. Residents are constantly complaining that there's too many outages. And I'm sure that you can, as a township board, we can get record of how many of these outages are occurring. But they were supposed to upgrade their infrastructure. And if these outages are still occurring, the township is without power. Why is this constantly happening? And there should be preventive measures in place. And why our area? Why is it always affected here? It doesn't make sense. And we have to be loud about this. We need to be assertive, reach out to them, let them know that our residents aren't happy with this. And you know what? We shouldn't have to buy generators. This shouldn't be the norm. That's all.
I have very few outages in my area, very few. I can probably count them on my hand over the last several years. And it has to do with the structure out there and how trees are in with it and everything else.
You're not on our circuit, though. You are not on Van Buren Circuit.
Thank you.
Yes, I am.
Your quarter is not on Van Buren. Everybody in Van Buren was out except for your house and the houses around you. Everybody.
Kevin, I am fed from that station there close to the dam.
No, the
Okay.
French Landing Dam went out. It was out all day. It was out 2 days and then
Well,
it went out
I'm telling you,
today.
that's where we are fed from, is from that substation there by the dam.
Did you lose power today? Because
No,
French Landing, they went down today.
Can we wrap this up?
Yeah, you know, he
Yeah,
did.
I'm gonna
the
power pretty
gentleman-
soon.
Let's wrap this.
Kevin, the manager did tell me, you're right, trustee Miller. He did say if you make noise, they will listen to the people that make the most noise. So,
It usually does. We can't accept this.
Okay, thank you. All right, is anybody else want to say something?
Through the
Nope.
chair, motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right, hearing no abstentions, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.
is the chair
night.
buying out?
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, bye, everybody.
Have a great evening.
Thanks, you too.